Ma'am, last warning. Keep your hands visible, the young SWAT officer shouted, his voice strained with adrenaline. Linda Tanner, 65, her arms burdened with groceries, struggled, her arthritic fingers too slow to react. Non-compliant subject, he yelled, then deployed his taser. Roy Tanner, 68, her husband, and a humble but highly decorated retired Special Forces Master Sergeant, watched in horror as his wife convulsed and dropped, 3 rifles now pointed at him. Roy didn't yell or flee. He stood up slowly, met the SWAT leader's gaze, and spoke 5 calm words. Call General Rohr right now. Every firearm paused. If you believe true strength speaks softly, type respect below. Roy Tanner was the kind of neighbor who blended seamlessly into the calm rhythm of Oakwood Drive. Locals saw him as the handy older gentleman who could fix anything mechanical, always had a cheerful word, and whose garage was often filled with classic rock and tools. At 68, his hands remained strong but bore the rough evidence of a tough life. Not just tool calluses, but faded scars from events unspoken. Few were aware that behind the modest demeanor was Master Sergeant Roy Tanner, retired U.S. Army Special Forces, a leader of missions few ever knew happened, whose commendations for valor were part of still classified operations. He liked it that way. His peaceful life with Linda was hard-won. Linda, his anchor of 43 years, knew his nightmares, read his silences, and helped him return to simply being Roy. Their modest ranch-style home was their haven, filled with the smell of her baking and the cluttered warmth of a life deeply shared. Roy volunteered at the VFW, mentored at-risk teens in auto mechanics at the local school, and otherwise kept a low profile. His background known only in select government files. That Wednesday seemed routine. Roy was under the neighbor's Chevy doing an oil change as a favor. Linda had just come back from shopping, arms full. The first odd sign was tires screeching. Too sharp, too aggressive for their tranquil block. Before Roy could crawl out, black tactical vans and armored trucks swarmed Oakwood Drive, pouring out a dozen heavily armed SWAT operatives in full gear, faces covered, weapons at the ready. Police, search warrant, everyone down, a voice blared through a loudspeaker. Roy came out slowly, hands up, grease on his fingers, trying to understand the shocking display of force. There's some mistake, he said. A rifle nudged him silent. Face down, now, one officer shouted. Roy obeyed, the asphalt biting into his cheek, diesel in his nostrils. He heard yelling, radios and boots moving fast. His wrists were zip-tied tight. Amid the confusion, he heard, "Target vehicle confirmed, house secured." That's when Linda's familiar blue sedan rolled into the drive. She stepped out, bags in hand, her face full of fear as she spotted Roy on the ground, swarmed by armed men. "Roy, what's going on?" 3 officers instantly turned toward her, rifles raised. "Ma'am, drop the bags. Hands visible." Linda stopped cold, paper sacks clutched to her chest, eyes wide. "Please, I don't understand. Non-compliant," a young officer shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Ma'am, last chance. Drop them." Her trembling hands began to lower the bags, but not fast enough for the hyped-up cop. "Non-compliant subject," he screamed. Without hesitation, he raised the taser and fired. Roy heard the sharp crackle, saw Linda's body stiffen as electricity surged. Groceries scattered, eggs shattered, milk splashed, apples rolled beneath heavy boots. Linda crumpled, a faint whimper escaping her lips. A tidal wave of cold rage swept over Roy, almost overwhelming. But decades of elite military training kicked in. He didn't yell or fight the restraints. His mind snapped into controlled analysis. He saw the young officer, part swagger, part panic, He saw the older SWAT commander watching, frowning. That was his target. "Let me up," Roy said, voice low but edged with authority that cut through the noise. A few flinched. The commander hesitated, then gave a brief nod. An officer reluctantly snipped the zip ties. Roy stood, slow and deliberate. He didn't rush to Linda, though he ached to. First, eliminate risk. First, reclaim control. He walked straight toward the commander, ignoring the rifle still tracking him. He stopped, locked eyes with the commander, and quietly said 5 words that chilled the air. "Call General Rohr right now." The SWAT commander, Captain Miller, a seasoned officer, blinked in disbelief. The name, calmly spoken by this grease-smeared, seemingly average man whose wife had just been tased on her own driveway, was the last thing he expected. "General Rohr," Miller echoed, a flicker of doubt flashing across his face. "And who exactly is General Rohr to you, old man?" A younger SWAT member chuckled. "Yeah, cut it out, Grandpa. We're here looking for a major narcotics trafficker. Carlos El Martillo Ramirez. Got a signed warrant, says he's holed up right here." Roy didn't even look at the young officer. His eyes stayed locked on Captain Miller. "This is 124 Oakwood Drive," Roy said evenly. "That warrant is probably for 124 Oakwood Avenue. Totally different postal code, opposite side of the county. It's a common dispatch mix-up in this region." He paused. "General James Iron Jim Rohr, head of the Joint Special Operations Command. We go back a long way. You've got 2 minutes to get him on your SATCOM line before this escalates into a national security nightmare you're not remotely prepared to deal with. And while you're at it," Roy continued, his voice lowering to a chilling near whisper that carried more weight than any shouted command, "you'd better send a medic to check on my wife. She's got a cardiac issue. If she suffers because of that rookie's nervous trigger finger, General Rohr will be the least of your concerns." Captain Miller looked hard at Roy, actually seeing him for the first time. The unflinching steel behind his stare, the calm authority in every syllable. This wasn't some frightened homeowner rambling nonsense. This was something else entirely. Doubt, cold, and unsettling crept into Miller's confidence. "Verify the address now," he barked into his radio, "and get a medic over to the woman immediately." He looked back at Roy. "If this is a stunt, old man, I don't bluff, Captain," Roy said, quietly but firmly. "Not when it comes to my wife." He nodded slightly. "Left breast pocket of my coat. Handle with care." Miller hesitated, then motioned for an officer to check. The officer gingerly reached into Roy's jacket and retrieved a well-worn leather wallet. He opened it, then froze. His eyes widened, and he silently handed it to Captain Miller. Inside, next to an aged photo of a young Roy and Linda, was a battered, plain military ID. But it wasn't the card itself that chilled Miller's spine. It was the tiny, barely noticeable Ankh symbol embossed in one corner. A symbol known only in the highest corridors of covert operations, indicating authority and clearance far beyond ordinary classification. "Black ink credentials," Miller muttered, going pale. He had seen that symbol only once, years ago, in a confidential intel briefing. It meant this man was nearly off books, someone whose true identity likely wasn't even printed on that ID, a figure who answered only to the very top. "Get me JSOC Command Priority Alpha now," Miller shouted into his comm, panic overtaking protocol. "I want General Rohr's personal SAT line patched through. This is a code black ink verification. Field activated." The entire unit seemed to freeze. The phrase black ink passed through the comms, silencing every other transmission. Rifles were lowered, subtly but clearly. The young officer who had fired the taser looked like he might vomit. He understood with nauseating clarity that his career was already in ruins. Roy, meanwhile, moved at last to Linda, kneeling beside her as the medic rushed over. He gently took her hand, his touch filled with quiet care. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "Everything's going to be fine." But when he glanced back at Captain Miller, his eyes were colder than glacial stone. The next 10 minutes were a frantic blur for Captain Miller and his unit. Frantic orders, emergency updates, the rising dread of realization. Dispatch confirmed the error. The warrant had been for Oakwood Avenue. Ramirez had already been arrested there 20 minutes earlier by a different team. They had hit the wrong address. They had electrocuted the wife of a man who, based on the hushed, scrambled updates now flooding into Miller's earpiece from JSOC, was a national-level operative of the highest classification, a living legend whispered about only in the most secure channels. And then General Rohr came on the line, his voice gravelly and commanding like a distant thunderstorm. Miller had never been reprimanded so thoroughly, so icily, so fearsomely in all his years. He stood stiff as stone, absorbing the fury. "Yes, General. Understood, General. It won't happen again, General." When the line went dead, Miller looked defeated. He stepped toward Roy, who remained by Linda's side. She was now semi-conscious but groggy and in discomfort as the medic checked her vitals. "Mr. Tanner, Sergeant Tanner." "Sir," Miller said, his voice shaky, face drained of color. "Words fail me. This was a monumental mistake. The address mix-up, your wife's injury. On behalf of myself and my entire detail, I extend our most sincere apology." Roy slowly lifted his gaze. His stare was unrelenting. "Apologies won't mend a potential heart issue, Captain. Apologies won't erase the fear your squad dumped on an innocent woman on her front lawn." He gestured around at the armored vehicles and armed personnel. "This isn't law enforcement. This is a military-grade occupation. And you, Captain, are a disgrace for letting it happen." Before Miller could reply, the low thump of rotor blades filled the air. Two sleek black unmarked helicopters descended rapidly, expertly landing on the street, sending leaves and dust flying in all directions. Men in dark civilian suits emerged, carrying specialized gear, moving with precise, intimidating coordination. One of them, clearly in charge, made way for General Rohr himself, who had arrived aboard one of the helicopters, looking like a battle-worn legend, even in his slightly disheveled travel uniform. "Sergeant Tanner," General Rohr called out, his voice thick with concern as he walked directly to Roy, ignoring the SWAT team entirely. He grasped Roy's shoulder firmly. "You and Linda okay, old friend?" "Linda took a hit, Jim," Roy said flatly, nodding at the shaken young Rohr's expression, already stone-hard, turned even more severe. He didn't address the young officer. He just stared. And in that silence, the young man saw his career, or what was left of it, vanish. The moment General Rohr and the shadowy federal unit arrived, the SWAT team's role was effectively over. The suited specialists, clearly from an elite, unnamed agency, assumed control. They arranged Linda's immediate transport via one of the black choppers to a premier cardiac center for full testing, with Roy riding along. General Rohr remained behind to coordinate with Captain Miller and the local police chief, who showed up looking pale as death. The meeting was short, harsh, and ended with Captain Miller's instant suspension. The rookie who fired the taser now faced a full IA probe and likely criminal charges, and the entire SWAT division was grounded pending a complete review by federal oversight. A misidentified address, aggressive tactics, the tasering of a senior woman, and the presence of a black ink operative. It was a disaster of judgment and protocol. Roy Tanner's 5 words hadn't just frozen a SWAT detail. They'd unleashed a shockwave that would travel through local policing and into hushed conversations in Washington, D.C. for a long time. Thankfully, Linda suffered no permanent heart damage from the taser, though she was badly bruised, emotionally rattled, and deeply shaken. Roy never left her side, his steady presence grounding her. They returned to their modest home days later, the driveway clear of spilled groceries, but not of the memory. General Rohr visited in person, not as a four-star, but as Jim, a longtime friend, offering help and ensuring they had every resource they needed, including discreet, high-level protection in case the Ramirez cartel wrongly believed Roy had any hand in the raid on their real safe house. Roy Tanner never wanted recognition. He acted solely to defend his wife and then to keep them both safe from a fast unfolding crisis. He had uttered 5 words, an access code to a level few ever know exists. He returned to fixing mowers and mentoring teens, the quiet sentinel of Oakwood Drive. But the local PD and SWAT officers would always remember the day they hit the wrong house and met a man whose calm voice outweighed all their hardware. Because real authority isn't loud orders or tactical gear, it's a history of earned trust, quiet bravery, and knowing exactly who to call when everything falls apart. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in quiet heroism. And that 5 words can indeed change. Officer. That trigger-happy kid there thought her grocery bags were